I mean, I'm sure you, at this point, you've pulled the trigger before and there's a good chance that you hit somebody on the other side. But the very first time that you're in that position and you've got somebody squarely in your crosshairs, were you asking yourself, can I really do this?
So I'll give you my perspective was, like I said, that first deployment was very, very kinetic, as they say, chaotic deployment. We were getting in gunfights all the time. I mean, it was just, if you were there, and I don't care what unit you were in or what your job was, if you were driving the chow truck, you saw a lot of combat. You know what I'm saying? So I had that experience in a chaotic sense. So I'll flash forward to then 2007 when I'm back in Ramadi. So it's a completely different time and place now. This is during the Al Anbar awakening. We're starting to make some headway. A lot of the Sunni tribes have then turned against what was originally ISI and then Al Qaeda in Iraq, all those groups, because you had some folks. What was his name? The Jordanian guy already, Zarqawi, was running that, and he was going around killing, sheikhs and other tribal leaders, and they were like, "Well, we don't like the Americans being here, but we definitely don't want that." So they ended up coming over and siding with us, and we started this whole process, right? So it was a different time and place, and there was, we were out on a mission and we're set up. We'd go to a home at that time for as long as we can, 24 to 48 hours. When it got into really, really hot summer months, you could only bring so much water and stuff. So, and exhaustion would set in, but we were out there for a couple of days, and city's like dead quiet. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, it's just that hot, you're just sweat through everything. You're in this house, you've got your position set up where you can see. At this point, we had different tactics of how we would do it. This one had a family in it, but they had like a connected house. They were staying in it. So we just made sure we kept an eye and said, all right, don't go anywhere. It was kind of, it was hit or miss in how we did it, but that's a whole nother story. And this one was just, like I said, it's dead quiet. So we're looking out, it's just nothing all day long. I mean, literally at this point, we're like, man, there's not even a car on the street. Like, what's going on? So there's something odd. There's something up. We just don't know what it is yet, right? Then all of a sudden we hear one burst of fire, not far away. Like, this has got to be within a couple 100 meters. Then another burst, like 100 meters away, and then another burst. And then all of a sudden, like, the city erupts, and we're like, okay, here we go. It's on. I mean, it's on. And then just like you talk about, there we are. I'm on the gun, right? Waiting. I'm checking, but because we don't know the situation, but we're not getting shot at, but there is a lot of gunfire, right? So at that point, because of all of our experience and how many times we had been shot at, we weren't like super amped up yet. We're just waiting to see what happens. And what do I see? Guy coming out with an AK-47, and he's poking his head around around the corner, just looking around the wall. And I'm like, oh, here we go. And he wasn't looking at us, but I didn't know what he was looking at. So right there, you're looking through the scope there's gunfire going off. He has an AK-47. He's not in any type of police or military uniform, right? But at the same time, it's Iraq. Everyone's got an AK-47, right? That doesn't mean anything on its own. And he starts to bring up that rifle, and you're having that's right there, because the situation was not there. I wasn't presented with some obvious target here. It wasn't someone shooting. It wasn't someone attacking me. It was just, am I going to kill this guy? Am I going to end this guy's life right now? And then I'm having this doubt about it, not about killing someone, but what if I do this and it's, this guy didn't deserve to die, and I get in a whole bunch of trouble for it. Right. Well, what's that? Because you have that power and that authority. You have to be the one to make those decisions on the ground. And I sat there for just a second, literally finger on the trigger. I'm thinking about it right now. I'm like literally sweating from the heat of just thinking about this story. And I'm looking at the guy, and nothing about him said, I'm about to go fight someone. I'm trying to kill someone. Just nothing was there. And that's why I was so hesitant. And he picked up that AK and he started firing it in the air. And then we heard more and more and more. Turns out Iraq just won a soccer game, and everyone in that city was who had any access to a television was watching that game. And when they won, it was celebration time, and they celebrated by firing AKs into the air. So this guy, who had no idea that I was even there, had no idea I was looking at him through the scope of a rifle, almost died, almost bled out on the street because he was celebrating a soccer game. I mean, like, it's just all the emotions are coming back right now. I'm feeling it. You're just like, holy crap. Like, That stuff to me is always more difficult than you're in a gunfight and people are trying to kill you. Like that's pretty primal, pretty basic. And if you have the appropriate training, you can get through those situations. When it's something in there where you're not sure, when that little bit of doubt creeps in, oh man, that's when that heart starts racing.
All along, you wanted to go into the infantry. You ended up in airborne, obviously part of the infantry. Would you say on the whole your experience was what you thought it was going to be? Or did it exceed or fall short of your expectations?
I don't think you can expect whatever you want, but I don't think what you expect is ever what you get, right? It's what you make of it. It's about when you put yourself so far out on a limb, what happens next? And no one knows because no one went that far out on a limb, or the last person that did left and stayed gone. And so for me, I didn't have anyone in the military. I'm in Iowa, right? And so this war says that I should join, and I want to join. I want to participate, and I think I like hitting people a little bit, and so maybe the infantry is probably more for me. And then the opportunity of we can go anywhere in the world sounds really neat, but it was never one thing or the other. But I think what actually shaped, obviously, my community growing up, but what shaped me who I am in the military was my leaders, right? Those that take you under the wing and say, don't do this and you can do this. See this is right, this is wrong. Those that say show up at 5:45 and they're there at 5:30, right? Those that set the precedents. And that is what I saw in Italy. When I showed up to Italy, I actually met 1,200 combat infantrymen, and they all had a little star on their airborne wings because they jumped into Iraq March 26, 2003. I've done a million push-ups because I didn't jump into Iraq March 26, 2003 with them. I was in high school. Sorry, I couldn't get out, and I joined as soon as I could. But it's about creating that legacy, right? It's always bigger than the individual. And I think that's what makes the military so powerful, is that it's not what I can do for me, it's what I can do for you. Right. And what the person next to you can do for you, and what the person on the other side can do for us. And all of a sudden, when we start looking out for so many people around us, we become better. It is truly a team, and we do incredible things that are otherwise unexplainable without the idea of a team that is willing to sacrifice it all. Todd, we sit here on a Sunday on Memorial Day, and I'm standing on the backs of giants. I've seen the biggest, the fastest, the bravest, the most selfless people that we could ever meet. And they're not here with us. I've walked with them in the mountains of Afghanistan, and they're not here. They never had the chance to have a wife or children. And I know what it means because I am enjoying it now at this point in my life. 10 years later, I get to sit here and know that there's no better life than we have right now. And the only thing that I can attribute this great life to is those that gave everything, every single one of their tomorrows for our today. And they did it so we can have every single today we get to enjoy. It's something so powerful, this idea of service. And I never understood it until the military told me that we are better together than we are separate.
Your actions on Iwo Jima are well documented. Your actions are Marine folklore. Your humility about the whole thing is, just as American as it should be. And one of the things that, so I want to encourage everyone to, to go study the details because it's so well documented. But where I kind of want to pick up on all of this is where things happened as you were being awarded the medal. And what I love is your story about the back-to-back meetings with the president and then the commandant of the Marine Corps. Mm. And that I think you were so nervous when you met the president. Yeah. The only time you were more nervous, though, was the next day when you met the commandant.
Exactly right.
Can you tell us about that experience?
Yes. Of course, I want to go back up just a little bit because I was still on Guam when the notice came through that I was to be shipped back to the States. And we had been, when we came back from Iwo, we completely changed our training regimen. Previously, we had just been trained to fight in jungle warfare type. Now, we're going to start learning how do you fight in a city. How do you approach a house? How do you go through a window? How do you get through a door? And how do you go down a street in a column in a city? You know,
And that was obviously in preparation for the upcoming invasion of Japan.
Kyushu is where we were going to end
Okay.
up. Yeah, but we thought it was all going to be Tokyo. That's all we knew. We'd never heard of those other communities at all. You know, and the only reason we know about Tokyo was because of Tokyo Rose. She talked to us about every night. If you had a radio, we didn't, but they could put it over a speaker, and we all could hear it from the speakers nailed up in the trees. And
Tokyo Rose being the Japanese propaganda. Maybe.
Yeah.
And
I mean, she told us where we were going. I mean, she had more information than we did. Absolutely. So all of us thought, we're going to Tokyo. Well, the first sergeant called me to his tent, or sent a runner and got me. And I went up to his tent and he said, get in your khaki uniform. We had one set of khaki tans or uniform, and we had to, every Friday, iron those so that we could stand a Saturday morning inspection. And you had to have your crease in your trousers and in your shirt, you know.
in the
You had to be
middle of the
Marine.
Pacific.
Yeah, we're on Guam. Yeah. So, yeah, and he said, you're going to go see the general. And I said, why? I had never seen the general. I knew his name, but I'd never seen him. I didn't know who he was or where he was or anything. And he said, well, I don't know. Just that's what they told me. Go get your khaki. So I went to my tent and ironed my khaki out and got the creases all set and came back, and they put me in a Jeep and took me to the general's tent. I was frightened again, half to death, because I didn't know why I was going to the general's tent. Usually you only go there when you're in trouble,
Sure,
right?
sure.
So I couldn't figure out what I had done that would require me to go see the general. Well, so when I got there was a colonel standing outside. His aide was outside the tent. And he had a door on his tent. We never did have a door on our tent. But he told
Well, at
me...
least you had a tent.
We had a tent, yeah, yeah. And we had foxholes dug beside every bunk in the tent, so that if Charlie came over, we called the Japanese plane flying over Charlie. If Charlie came over and there was a possibility of being bombed, we'd roll out of our tent and roll into our hole right beside our bunk, but outside the tent, under the flap, you know. So he told me, gave me instructions, walk in, stand at attention, walk up to his desk, stand at attention until he tells you what to do. Okay. I am scared to death. I don't know why I'm there. And so when I get there, he tells me I'm being recalled to the Capitol building, and my date of reporting there is October the 3rd and so on. And if he ever mentioned in his talk the Medal of Honor, I didn't know what it was. I'd never seen it, never heard tell of it, didn't know what the world the thing meant. I've made the comparison several times. 20 years ago, if you'd said to me gigabyte,
You wouldn't have known.
I would have. I still don't know what it is, but at least I'm familiar with the word.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, at that time, I wasn't even familiar with the word. You know. So he told me I'd been called back to Washington, and he handed me an envelope with my orders in it. You know. And so then he dismissed me. And I went outside, and the colonel was still standing out there. And I had this big envelope in my hand, and he said, on the back of that is a seal. Don't break that seal, that's a court-martial offense. Well, I turned and looked at it. I hadn't even looked at it, and I looked at it, and it was about the size of a silver dollar, and it had the block letter E in there. And his name was Erskine. So that was his official seal.
Okay.
And he told me I'd turn those into Hawaii when I got there. Okay, that's what I did. So anyway, to finish your story, when we were receiving the medal on the White House lawn, there were 13 of us, 7 Navy corpsmen and 6 Marines. And the medals had been approved quite some time before, like in August. Mine was approved in August, but they were not going to call you back from overseas combat just to give you this medal. They're not going to, unless they're going to use you some way. Some of the early ones they did. You know, they sold bonds and went around over the country doing that.
Right, that's the story of Ira Hayes and
Yeah.
and some of those.
Yeah.
Okay.
But with us, there was no reason to call us back. So now there are 13 of us that had already been approved for the medal. Now we're all there at the same time.
And were all of these recipients from the Battle of Iwo Jima?
No.
Okay.
Guam, Saipan, Iwo Jima, so mixture, yeah. And Navy corpsmen the same way. Well, everything's alphabetical, naturally, still alphabetical. So they started with the first letter of, you know, like the A's and went through. Well, I'm clear at the end, next to last. The last guy's name is Zimmerman. So he's last, I'm next to last. Well, they call you up. You walk up to the president and you're standing eyeball to eyeball with him, you know, right, very close. And they read your citation of what, why you're receiving this medal that I had never heard tell of. I had never heard anything in the citation. Nobody ever came to me and said, "What'd you do?" Somebody else wrote up all the words in the citation based on testimony of my commanding officer and fellow Marines. So I had never heard those words. And I'm standing there listening to these words that make no sense to me whatsoever.
There's some big words in there.
Yeah. And at the time, I didn't catch it, but later I caught it. Of course, they gave you the original citation eventually, signed by the president, you know. And there was one word about halfway through the citation, and it said he went forward alone. I didn't. I wasn't alone. I had Marines supporting me. I could not have accomplished my mission without Marine support. And apparently the good Lord was with me because they never touched me. In 4 hours of time, they shot at me with machine guns and rifles and threw grenades at me, but I was never touched. And
That'll make a believer out of you, won't it?
absolutely. There's got to be a reason why I say I was saved and the guy right beside me didn't. You know, he lost his life. Why did he have to go and I didn't? I don't understand that. Still don't. So 2 Marines that I'd selected to give me protection that day when I would be trying to get to a pillbox to get flame in it, they sacrificed their lives that day protecting mine. And I didn't know them. I knew 2 of the guys helping me because they'd been in my squad, or I'd been in their squad. But the other 2, they were just Marines. And I said, you and you, come with me. And I told them what I want them to do. I want them to fire at the pillbox that I'm trying to get to put some flame in it. You know?
Yep. Keep their head down while I move up.
Yeah.
Just standard fire and maneuver.
So I didn't know that had happened until years afterwards, that those 2 Marines had sacrificed their lives, and I didn't know who they were. And we didn't find out until about 5 years ago. We finally learned their names.
I certainly don't remember the very end, the tail end of it, except for the final piece of Hell Week, which was the grad portion. And I'll share the story. So we're cruising back. It's 5.5 days into it, and the instructor gets on the megaphone and he says, "Hey guys, I'm sorry to report, but you know, the class before, 2 classes before you is getting ready to graduate today, so we got to roll you 24 hours to the right." And two things happened right then and there. One, my brain exploded because I was like, oh my God, another day. But at the same time, it told me right away, oh, we're at day 5. It's Friday. Sweet. Because you have no sense of time. You only know the sun goes up, the sun comes down, and you start to gauge it by you eat every 6 hours. You have a new instructor staff come in every 8 hours. So you can kind of gauge it, because you can't just walk up to an instructor and be like, hey, can I get a time hack real quick? It don't work like that in the military, you know. So you kind of gauge it off of that. But after a period of time of just your body going to complete mental and physical fatigue, you have no idea or comprehension of where you're at. But then that led me to, okay, we're at day 5. And then you think to yourself, wow, I may get this far. And as you're thinking through this stuff, you're standing in front of the beach, and the instructor's, he gets on the megaphone, he says about face, or I'm sorry, he says, interlock arms, you're about to get surf tortured. And so we're all standing there facing the ocean, day 5.5. You're getting ready to get in 50-degree water again. You don't want to.
How many had dropped out at this point?
At this point, I had no clue. I mean, I didn't even know what we started with and how week. I think I know we started with like 180 some guys, and I think we were roughly around between 30 and 40 people left.
180 to 100 to down to 30.
We started day 1 of Buds, which would be 5 weeks or 4 weeks prior to Hell Week, with 180 some people. And by day 5 of Hell Week, we were at between 30 and 40 people. Men, yeah. So
that's a pretty impressive number.
Yeah, I don't remember most of them going away. You're like, what happened? Where's everybody? But we're standing there facing the ocean, interlock arms, getting ready to get surf tortured again, which is basically you sit in the water, you lay in the water, and you just let that cold water surge over your body and just chill you to the core. And I remember the instructor saying on the megaphone about face right at the fringe of the water. We turn around and there's nobody there. Just an American flag stuck in the ground floating. And right then and there, I knew my why. Why would they show us that? Like, why? There's no trophies, there's no medals, there's an American flag floating. And they showed us that because so many men and women have died defending our country. And that's all you need to understand is what you fight for. And I was so blown away by that. And I was like, wow, I instantly got my meaning and purpose, my why of why I was there. Because you don't know what being a SEAL is. You're in training. You know what it is to be a student. You don't know what it is on the other side. But I got my why, and I was ready to fight. I was like, I'm in. I'm 100% committed. That's not indoctrination. That is American spirit. And I was so proud. And then right behind that, all the instructors come running up from behind the berm, screaming and cheering. It's the last time that an instructor would ever cheer for a student ever again through the rest of training. So fired up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? And you're so broken down. And the instructor, commanding officer of Hell Week, or commanding officer of SEAL training, gets on the megaphone and says, congratulations to you, future Navy SEALs. Hell Week is secured. And of course, it's like, you want to jump to the sky. You want to get so fired up and excited. And you just realize that your body doesn't want to move another inch. And so you're like, good job. Where is my bed? And then you go and you lay in your bed and you're like, I can't wait to close my eyes and go to sleep. And then you're just up for the next 20 hours because you're so fired up. And you're like, but that was the most important part of that situation was I made a promise to myself that I would call my parents to tell them that I made it. And it was simple. I made the call, and I made the call to my mom first. And I said, hey, Mom, how you doing? And she said, oh my gosh, sweetie, I'm great. How are you doing? I said, that's a great question. Really tired. I'm exhausted, but I wanted to let you know that your son made it through Hell Week. And I'm not a failure anymore. And thank you for everything from the bottom of my heart, because you and my father are the reason that I'm here. And that was the most rewarding thing. And I call that my spark. You see, I get emotional about it when I talk about it, because if you don't fight for something you believe in, then you're not fighting. You're not moving forward. I use my spark every time I needed to turn on the gas and fight as hard as I can possibly do. So it's not about the times that are great. It's about generally every day, am I doing my absolute best? So I always refer back to my spark. Am I impressing my parents? Am I showing them that it's worth it, that I'm busting my butt? And so making that call to her, she started crying. I was an emotional basket case. I was like, hey, gotta get off the phone before I completely lose it in front of my teammates here. I gotta act tough, you know. Then I called my dad, and he had choice words because, you know, my dad was in the impression where he's a reader. And so he looked at the statistics SEAL training, and he said, you know, it's an 85% attrition rate. And I said, well, I don't even know what that word means. So does that mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And he's like, dude, you got to get your head on a swivel. You have no idea what you're about to go up against. And when I told my father I graduated from Hell Week and that I was going to be a SEAL, he was beside himself. Because it was the first time in my life that I got to prove to my parents that I was doing something with my life. And it was the first time that I proved to myself that I could possibly be excellent. And what you find in time as being on a team is that the only reason that you're excellent or exceptional is because you are surrounded by it. And it's the composition of the team that makes the team excellent. And each individual gives a little piece to make you what you are. So quite an amazing time.
The fateful night, you were on a mission
Right.
in Afghanistan.
Yes, sir.
Take it from
Take
there.
it there. So October 26, 2009, I was woken up about midnight, 11:30, to go on a, we did 12-hour shifts as crew chiefs and pilots. We went midnight to midnight, or midnight to noon, noon to midnight. I was on the midnight to noon, so they woke us up at about 11:30 because we had a mission that was going off at 01. And they briefed us. We were escorting 2 Army Chinooks for an insert for a high-value individual. And as the Huey and the Cobra, we were supposed to provide close air support over the top as they inserted all the guys for the insert.
So these were special
The
operations.
special operations FBI guys. I found out later there were some FBI guys on there, some special operations. After takeoff, we lost sight of our lead helicopter. The pilot inside the helicopter, in our cockpit, was able to say we're blind, but unable to say that we're blind on lead over the radio, over our intercom. And by the time we had done that, I heard, oh shit, from one of the from the pilots, and then heard a meshing of metal. The lead helicopter had gotten, I think that we got out in front of lead helicopter, and then when lead went to cross over, they ended up clipping us at some port of our helicopter, and then we ended up crashing to the ground from about 300 feet in the air. When we hit, we ended up losing our tail rotor and our tail boom, and then became just a fuselage. And then when we hit the ground, I think I was thrown out of the helicopter. And then it caught fire. It was burning. All the rounds were burning off and cooking off. And I didn't really know what was going on. All I could hear was fire crackling, and one of the pilots was screaming. I was calling for Fleury. I was calling for Jones, and nobody was answering me. And then somebody came up and started moving me, and I started screaming. And I told him, no, don't move me. My biggest fear was being captured alive. But I was in so much pain, I think, in my pelvis area that they were trying to get me out of there. But they ended up getting me out of there within 6 minutes of.
And who is they?
So the 2 helicopters that we were escorting, they saw the Cobra explode, and then they saw our fire from our helicopter. So mission turned from assault to recovery and, life-saving a mission from there.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the epitome of a mission only survives the first
Right.
round fired, or the mission statement, if you will.
Right.
So you woke up, you hear crackling, and that's one of those things a lot of people don't even think about. The ammunition, when it catches fire, and that's one of the things that the enemy is always going to go for, and that's what took down a lot of ships in World War II, was that the ships would be, or the armory would be hit.
Yep.
And that's what sinks the ship, because all the secondary explosions. So was that going through your mind that, I mean, oh my God,
I think I was
may
more
get
worried about getting hit by one.
Yeah.
Really, honestly, because we had 550 cal rounds and 1,500 7.62 rounds. We didn't have any rockets, but we did have, you know, about 2,000 rounds of bullets.
And a 50 caliber round, mind you, by the Geneva Convention is not intended for human beings. I mean, it literally can take someone and cut them in half. So yeah, I can see where that would have been a little bit of a fear to you. What, I mean, you wake up and they're trying to move you, you're screaming because you realize everything's hurting. I mean, describe all the injuries from 300 feet worth of fall.
So I broke my right tibia fibula. I had an open book pelvic fracture. Basically, for males, our pelvis doesn't open up. Females, it does to allow the, you know, the passage of the baby. But mine had opened about 5 millimeters, which I was bleeding on the inside. So they didn't know if that was probably one of the other ways that I was going to pass away, was just from internal bleeding. I blew out my left acetabulum. That's where your ball sits inside the socket of your hip. I broke 3 transverse processors on my back, 2 collapsed lungs, 4 broken ribs, and a broken shoulder, TBI. And it's not a severe TBI, but you know, a bad enough head injury that, you know, it still affects me to this day a little bit.
You think? I want to hear, whether it's your first year, last year, whatever, when someone asks you about Carry the Load, how do you describe Memorial March, the event, to them?
Go
Not
ahead.
everybody at once. Don't overrun me here.
Well, I can tell you how I had younger kids, and I know, Todd, you've heard me talk about this before, but I always talk about understanding the loss and Carry the Load, the actual Memorial March. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into it. So unfortunately, it seems like the best way to experience it is to participate. But I always, when my kids were younger, explaining death to a child is nearly impossible. And so you're trying to tell them, hey, we're out there honoring those who lost something that's so special to them. So I said, tell me what's the most special thing that if you lost, you would be so upset. And they're like, you know, young enough, they're like, stuffies. If I lost my stuffy animal, I'd be really upset. I said, right. That's, you know, their biggest loss to them was a stuffed animal. So I made them put it in a backpack and carry that with them to understand what loss meant to them. Because I had to, you know, put it in a child's mind and said, that's what these people feel, but they lost their loved ones and they're carrying them with them because it's important for us to honor them and carry, you know, to move forward by carrying that with them. And so that's where it started. And, you know, going back to the very first year, I had them draw up something. So my wife was kind enough to find someone, but like my daughter carried for the police and K9, and we had it laminated on her backpack with their little stuffy animal. And my son, hopefully you guys don't be offended, he carried for the U.S. Army. You know, each year they would come up with who they were caring for, but it all started with just understanding that burden of loss. And then I think, you know, Todd, you and I have talked about this, and then the celebration of life that came with it. Mm-hmm. And that it's a way in which we, again, the civilians who did not participate can participate and honor those who did serve and then gave us the ultimate sacrifice.
Awesome.
You know,
Aaron, what about you?
For me, I'm going to bounce around here a little bit, but I've had to change the way that I have described the event to people. It's something that I'm so passionate about, and it's really easy to ramble on about. But years ago, my kids, like Brad said, all my kids know of Memorial Day is Carry the Load. So they haven't really had any Memorial Days without Carry the Load in their lives. Mm-hmm. And so my son, when he was 8, was interviewed by WFAA, and he was 8 years old and had walked 23 miles at that time. And so when they turned to me, I said, you know, this is it's a day to restore the true meaning of Memorial Day. Over the years, Memorial Day has morphed into mattress sales and swimming pool parties and hot dogs. Well, I didn't realize that was going to offend so many people. So the comments on that WFAA video where somebody needs to call CPS for making his kid walk 23 miles and,
and then go to school.
And then go to school. And what's wrong with eating hot dogs and having swimming pool parties on Memorial Day? So I've had to reformat my explanation and when I used to say all of the hot dogs and stuff like that, that's fine, do that. But really, Todd, you helped me with a speech at one point that really called to order that it's us from the Saving Private Ryan part that I think about all the time, which at the end of the movie, when he says, earn this, earn it. For me, I explain it to people by saying, this is us earning it. This is us carrying that load for those veterans who can't carry it for us anymore. And it's an incredibly moving event, and it's just an honor to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Charles, what about you?
It's interesting. If you would have asked me that in year 2, I probably would describe it very different than it is today. I mean, to me now you have to say, first of all, it's a culmination of a walk across America. We've got 4 relays now that converge on Dallas as that starts and ignites the weekend of Memorial Day weekend. And you have an opportunity to come here and recognize the sacrifice that's been made on our part from so many people. I mean, and it's not, yes, we absolutely have soldiers, sailors, first responders that are on the line today. But, there are those that, last decade, back in all the various wars and dates that have sacrificed for us to get where we are today. And it's an opportunity to now honor and think back about how we got here and who sacrificed for us. And it's meaningful for those scouts. We start out the weekend by putting out our field of flags.
Oh yeah.
The matrix.
So powerful.
And it takes hours and hours and hours and a lot of blisters on your thumbs. And what we say is every flag you put in that ground represents the life of somebody who gave their all so that we can be here, so we can enjoy our freedoms. And that's the right way to start that Memorial Day weekend.
The first week of June 2011, a guy named Jack First calls me up, and I'd met him through a creative session with the Boy Scouts. And he said, do you still have that little crummy airplane? And I had a Baron. And he said, can you fly that down here? I need you to meet this guy, Clint Bruce and Stephen Holly, because they walked around a pond that year, 2011, and he wanted a national
White
relay.
Rock Lake. Yeah.
Right. And so I showed up down there and met Clint. Stephen wasn't there. Met Clint at his facility where he has a house. He was teaching people how to protect themselves and whatnot. And I'll never forget it. Jack says, you got 5 minutes. I want a national event. My background, of course, is doing global events, Olympic torch relays, all sorts of crazy stuff, Live Earth, Live 8. Debbie told me to mention all this stuff.
Oh, hey, don't worry. You may gloss over it.
I'm just saying.
I'm coming back to it.
Okay. So, but anyway, then that fall, Clint says, hey, there's this guy, Coleman Ruiz, who was a lieutenant commander, Navy SEALs, was going to retire that fall. And he said, Jack, you need to have Coleman work with Dill. And that fall, Coleman's first day of being retired, he shows up at my office in Atlanta, and off we go on the national relay.
So wait a minute, that was the day he retired?
Yes, the day he retired.
Was the day you stepped off?
No. The day he came. Well, that was in the fall. We planned we would step off May 1st, 2012 from West Point Cemetery. And we actually had 4 different routes the first year, but we didn't have the money to do them. We're now doing all of them 10 years later. But yeah, and unbelievable. And then the other key, the other key point of that first year was Stephen and this guy, Pryor Blackwell, shows up. It's pouring down rain in Tennessee. Middle of the night.
Rain story.
Oh God, it was raining cats and dogs. And here comes Stephen and this guy Pryor, who had it was hilarious. And they walked that entire night. Smitty, I don't know if you were there that night when they showed up. Were you there?
Yeah, you and I were walking when they showed up, and
yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I'm talking. It was raining as if a fire hose was pouring on you. And
it was Forrest Gump rain. I heard it was Forrest Gump rain, and I heard that Smitty, if I remember this correctly, you were wearing some really cool shoes.
I got so much grief for those my first year, but that really spoke to, we didn't know what we were doing that much, and I showed up in Vibram 5-finger toe shoes, and man, did I pay the price in blisters.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you kind of mentioned this already, Dill, and I was going to ask this in a very sarcastic way, but what made you so qualified to put something like this together?
Oh gosh. Well, I was blessed to do events all over the world for 40 years. And in 2011, we were in the process of selling our company. And I'd worked in about 80 countries. And I really don't know. I think God just said, hey, Dill, you got one more cool thing to go do. And I never thought that for 5 years I would walk like Smitty. The first 5 years, I think I walked 600 miles a year. And that was from 60. I'm 70 now. So 60 to 65 years old. And man, we have stories. Oh my gosh. You're out there. You had a route. We're very good at logistics. I wasn't a military person, but I worked all over the world when I do my events. They always call me the general. And that's my other nickname. And, it's like we get stuff done. And that's why I think Jack recognized that. And the next thing you know, and a guy named Doc Pershing is the guy that knew Smitty and all these guys. He was an emergency room doctor from up there in Wisconsin. And he lined us up with the guys. And right, Smitty, off we went. And we just, we put our heads down. We knew we had to do stuff. We knew we had to get it done. And there was never a moment in our first year that we thought we wouldn't get there.
How has this journey, this 10-year journey, because that's really truly what it is. And when you and I, first got to know one another, this organization looks very different from that point to now. So how has Stephen Holly changed?
I would tell you that 2011 was within 3 or 4 years of getting out of the Navy and getting in the commercial real estate business, focusing on raising a family, back here in Dallas. And I think we've talked about this, and I've talked about it, but there was a transition there that it was, personally with a family, 5, at that time it was a couple of kids into what is ultimately now 5, but being very happy at home, being very happy, in my marriage, and thinking professionally, I was very happy. I was at a phenomenal company, learning a business that learning a business that I'd always wanted to get into. But at the same time, there were some underlying issues that
there was something that wasn't quite fulfilling.
Yeah, there was, at the end of the day, I during that transition, I thought, you know what, if I can hit this number compensation wise professionally, then things will be all right. And then when that number came, and there was a hollow feeling there, I thought, okay, maybe it's this number, and not that those numbers were any big deal, but I figured out that there was something else going on there. And it was through, I really miss being in the Navy. There's a professional satisfaction that came from wearing your nation's uniform and the friendships that existed.
Sure.
And ultimately there was I always tell people there was a level of adrenaline there that you can't really match as a civilian unless you're doing something illegal. That's the way I
don't know what you do in your off time,
but I don't know. So there was a lot of different components to it, but I really missed it. And
Sure.
I actually, at one point in time, this was probably 2010, maybe 11. I sat down with Molly, my wife, and said, what would you think about going back in the Navy? And we talked through it. She was going to be supportive of what we thought was in the best interest of our family.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat down with a good friend of mine he was the pastor at the church we were at the time, and he's still a great friend today, Richard Ellis. And I was talking to Richard about that decision, and he said, well, let me ask you a question. What made you get out of the Navy? And I may have told you this story before,
Mm-hmm.
but he said, what made you get out of the Navy? And I said, I wanted to focus on being a dad, being a good husband, raising a family. And he said, so has that priority changed in the last 3 or 4 years? And I said, no. And that ultimately kind of got me reset on, that being the ultimate priority to having some fulfillment. And that's a very long answer to your question, but it was about that time that we started working on Carry the Load. We had this event. We raised money for these other nonprofits, both military, veteran, first responders. And it was through that effort of raising that money and being able to give that money away that scratched that itch of being able to continue to serve.
Sure.
And so it was a, not that all those issues went away, but it was a big transition for me to being able to turn the corner and settle in, for lack of a better term.
So being able to scratch the itch of service to be above self kind of put it on hold. It didn't, knowing you, it didn't completely eradicate that need. And I tell people all the time, they ask me if I miss the Marine Corps, and I say, I miss it every day, but I don't miss one day of it, because there were some hard days. But, for all the reasons you mentioned, it's the camaraderie, it's the adrenaline rush. And I want to, prepare you. I want to talk about your friend, Brian Bourgeois here in a minute. Fast roping out of a helicopter, that's a rush that you can't get at the job now.
No.
But, making sure that at the center of everything we do, we went in, and while it may not have been our primary motivator, it ended up being service above self. It ended up being a greater cause than ourself. It sounds like you were still missing that.
Yeah, I think a greater cause, yes. But just as important to that is the commitment and the loyalty you have to those guys you were serving with. That for me made it really hard. The first SEAL that died in Iraq, I believe this was August of 06. And I'd gotten off active duty just before that in 2006. And in my mind, there was some mental calculus of having done a few tours through Iraq and, predominantly serving with guys on the West Coast over there. Although we'd had guys that were, blown up in IEDs, we had guys that were shot, but no one had died. And for whatever reason, that first, Mark Lee's, that finding out that he had died in Iraq, it just something flipped in my head, and there was a lot of I wouldn't say it's guilt, but there was a lot of desire to be back with those guys that I've been serving with, because they were continuing to operate over there. And
so you're hitting on something
But hold on, so it is service to something bigger than yourself. But it was really a loyalty that I felt that there was some betrayal there for having gotten out.
And that's exactly where I want to go with this, because I think that is the great tug of war for each individual who is married with a family inside of the military, because you have this commitment to these guys to your left and right, but you got a commitment to the people at home, and that's a struggle. Just like you went to to your pastor, and I think he asked a great question. Is that still what you are trying to achieve? Being that great husband and father.
And one thing I'll say there, a lot of the guys that I served with were their 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th platoon, however long they'd been operational, a long time, and a lot of them were married with kids. And so what I'm not saying right now is those guys didn't have their families as their top priority. They absolutely did. They were just able to manage it in a way that I couldn't see myself managing.
Whether you're in day to day or you're missing it and you're out of the service now, that tug of war is going to exist. It's going to exist for a while, because one of our motto in the Marine Corps, and I shouldn't say motto, but one of the things that people used to like to say was God, country, corps. Those are your priorities. And I have thought about that many, many times. And I used to think, well, where does family fit into that? Because you can't exclude family from it, because the family is really the backbone of the Marine Corps.
Right.
And I always struggled with God, country, corps. Okay, where does family fit into that? I'm not really sure. Maybe it's part of God. Maybe it's part of corps, because, that's the family. But I mean, what you're talking about, again, I see, in retrospect, I have seen so much of that personal tug of war. I have this responsibility to these guys, but I have this responsibility to these people that I'm either related to by marriage or blood. And so ultimately you decided not to go back in. And I'm just going to ask you point blank, do you regret that decision?
No, hindsight being what it is, at that point in time we had 2 kids, and again, it was
only 2 of the now fire team reinforced Holly.
Right. And now, we added 3 more there in pretty quick succession. But I think that was God's way of telling me that the decision you made was for me the right decision. And we were blessed with 5 beautiful, healthy kids, and a phenomenal wife in so many ways that are immeasurable. In her support and the things she's done for me over the years. So it was absolutely the right decision.
Okay, so fast forward, you made the right decision by not going in, but yet you miss it every day. How did that transfer itself into some of the personal challenges that you've had? I mean, you knew that not going back in was the right thing. Did any of that, the fact that you didn't go back in, though, did any of that contribute to some of the personal challenges you've faced? And a lot of those challenges are challenges that we help people with and Carry the Load.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I realize I'm not asking a pointed question, but
yeah,
it's a major topic.
You bet. Before I go directly to your question, I'll also, to put a bow around the previous question as I'm sitting here thinking about it, you know, you like to think you had an impact. That time in the Navy, you can point to things you were involved in that had a larger impact. And that's a part of missing the opportunity to be in those types of situations. Hindsight, looking back over the last 10 years, I think through the impact that Carry the Load has had, and again, me being a very small part of it, but being involved in this organization and looking at the impact across the country with these nonprofit partners and these families and those that these nonprofit partners serve, you know, the thousands and however many people that impact has had. That for me is God's way of telling me, yeah, you did some really great things and fun things that were very impactful in you know, your time in the SEAL teams, but I think the breadth of the impact over the last 10 years has really solidified that it was the right decision to get out.